Hello and welcome back, this is ProTelDev back with another Game Jam video. And this time we'll be looking at the Bean Jam 9. So that was a Game Jam that took place in February on the 26th, I believe it was. Something around then, and it was a 3-hour Game Jam, which was very difficult and was very different to what I've done in the past in terms of Game Jams. I've never done one that short amount of time. I've done a Game Jam that's 8 hours, but going from 8 hours to 3 hours is a pretty big jump, and usually I do a 2-day Game Jam because it gives me quite a lot of time. But this one was a 3-hour Game Jam, so the Game Jam was very, very interesting. I'm going to go in a little bit of detail on, the little bit of the planning, but specifically how the game turned out, and then build up to the gameplay, and finally the feedback. So, to start off with, the game is called Clubby The Clay Ball. So the theme of the Game Jam was announced, so I believe it was 30 minutes before the Game Jam, so technically it's 3 hours and 30 minutes. However, they gave you the 30 minutes extra as time for prepping, which is what I used it as, and I tried to stay to the rules exactly as it was. So everything had to be built by yourself. Everything, you couldn't use any art or anything outside of the Game Jam. So everything had to be built in those 3 hours. Everything had to be made in the 3 hours. I created my own sound effects and things like that. To start off with, in those 30 minutes before the Game Jam, and they announced the theme, which was clay. Initially, I went with a couple of different ideas, but 30 minutes really isn't very long to plan very deeply, so I just went with some basic concepts, which was, because this was only 3 hours, I really didn't want to go over the top. I really wanted to go basic concept, and try and add to it if I could. And so the idea was that there would be a clay ball in the center of the screen. You'd be able to shoot balls out parts of your body, which is clay balls, and you would be able to hit fire, which would slowly try and go to the clay ball that you are, and it would try and slowly shrink it down and burn it until it turns into a brick. Basically, you just had to shoot the fire. It was really straightforward, just using your mouse and clicking. And it wasn't too much to it. I was able to create a win and lose situation, so you could lose if the ball got too little of weight, and if there was too much weight, you would slowly get bigger and bigger, and so it would get harder and harder to avoid the fire, because obviously the bigger you are, the easier it is the distance to travel for the fire. I also made it so that the game would difficulty would gradually increase. So that was the initial idea that I came up with in those 30 minutes. There was some variations in how I was going to do it, but ultimately, with only 3 hours, I had to just try and get through it. So to start off with, there was that planning. It was a very, very basic plan, and then the 30 minutes was up with that, in such a quick amount of time that I just had to get straight into it. So load up the Unity. I did this as a 2D game because it was easier for me to get assets for if I could just quickly draw them. I started off by adding some basic elements into the game, so basic sprites with nothing on them that came with Unity automatically, and just added those in to get them working, added code in. Kind of had a good idea of what kind of code I wanted in the game, so usually on game jams, I'll add some basic code that's like add random size, add random spawning, add random rotation. These are the basic scripts I usually add to all my game jams that allow a little bit of variation to things like spawning. So I added that into it and added all those basic scripts and added some controls. And by the time the first hour was up, most of the controls were done, and the basic controls were already finished, and the coding was more or less in it. After that, I then spent the next hour trying to do a little bit of art, and I'm not the best at it, I'm not the quickest at it, and so it took me a little bit longer than you'd expect, but I basically got the art into it. So we got the clay ball with a little bit of animation, which isn't great, but there is animation there, and that was using a sprite sheet. I think it was about 10 layers of a sprite sheet, so it was quite a lot. And then I also added the flame sprite, obviously with their faces, and I added the background in. Clay balls are just the same thing as the our character is, which is Clubby the Clay Ball. After that, once I'd done the art, there wasn't much time left. I believe in the last half an hour, I ended up adding the audio in, which was me just making sound effects. So I believe there was 3 different effects. There was fire spawning / getting destroyed. There was the player getting hurt and dying, and then there was the pop, which is like when the player shoots or grows. So the coding for the big part of this that I wanted to really add a unique aspect to is the fact that it gets bigger and bigger, and so it'll get harder and harder. And with the difficulty coding, which was really basic, it unfortunately, one of the bigger things with these small game jams is I don't get a chance to test it really. So there was a lot of bugs with it, and the difficulty, because it hadn't been tested, really didn't seem to do much. It was meant to make it gradually harder by adding less and less time for the fire to spawn. However, the time was just so insignificantly small that it was such a gradual increase in difficulty that it didn't seem to make any difference. It was in fact making difference for me because I could see the code. I knew that it was gradually the time between each spawn was decreasing. However, if you were just playing it, you wouldn't really notice much difference. So after the game was made, and as I explained, it was really simple mechanics that was added in. There was no time to really test it. I had to get it uploaded. Unfortunately, due to an issue when I was trying to upload it, it ended up failing a couple of times, and then there was an issue. It didn't end up getting submitted correctly, and so it didn't appear in the game jam that I submitted it for. That's okay though, because ultimately I still did it and abide by the rules, and I was a part of their Discord at the time, so I was able to ask for feedback and get people to play it through the Discord, and they got to give me some feedback on it. So in terms of the Discord, I did put a couple of their comments into my page where the Clubby The Clay Ball can be played, which it's available now if you want to play it. I've left it as it is in the same condition that I finished it on. I don't want to add changes to it because I kind of think it's ingenuine when I've done a game jam specifically for a set amount, and usually if I'm going to improve it that isn't from the game jam, I'll add a new version in, just like I did with Corrupting Spring Enhanced, which if you play the original Corrupting Spring, that was the same version that came off the game jam for Harvest Mouse game jam, and then I created a new version of that game which is enhanced as a separate game, because I didn't want to mess with the original version, and I might do the same with this, but we'll see. But basically, to take away from it is that there's a lot of bugs, there's a lot of things that don't work, and it's kind of reflected on some of the feedback. So one of the big feedbacks was that the collisions weren't quite right. They were a little bit bigger than they should have been for certain sprites. Generally, that shouldn't happen, but it did. You also, I don't really punish spamming the click button. I didn't get the time to finish that code, but it was an easy fix to do. So I might want to, if I create a new version, I'll fix that. But at the moment, there's no punishing for auto-clicking. There should be a limit to how many you can shoot, but there isn't, so there's that. The graphics and sound, they said were excellent and a lot of fun. They also said that the graphics are quite cute and quite nice, so it's quite so that's good to hear. A couple of people encountered some weird things where the fire would actually make the clay ball grow, even though it's supposed to be the opposite. It's supposed to shrink. I've discovered that issue, and I know what the issue is. So if I update it, I might just fix bugs, so that it doesn't cause issues. But I wouldn't really add any new features to it. So I might just fix a couple of issues. They also enjoyed. People enjoyed the idea of it, and doing it in 3 hours is very, very difficult. It's hard to make a game in 3 hours, and this certainly proved it for me. I thought it was actually going to be a little bit easier than I thought initially before the game jam took place, because I figured if I had a solid plan down and a solid idea of where I wanted to code, it would be very simple, and the only restriction would be how quickly I could type. Really, things didn't go quite as planned, especially in the art aspect because I'm not very good at art. Things really didn't go as swimmingly as I thought it would be with the code because I was kind of a little bit stressed out when going through the game jam. But for 3 hours, it was really good. So that is my summary of the Clubby The Clay Ball game jam, the Bean game jam that I took part in. Hopefully I'll be doing more game jams in the future. I'm hoping to do one roughly maybe the end of every month, maybe in the middle of every month, just to try and build up more games, since last year it was not as many. So I look forward to that. This has been ProTailDev, and I'll see you next time.